Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cave of the Cross Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're opening up still and trying to figure out what is evil all about. Is it just a mirage that we all just feel icky things about things and that's just our personal opinions? Or is there something that we can actually ground evil in? And lo and behold, because we are Christians, believe it or not, we can ground it in a actual thing. And it's actually an antithesis of the ultimate, the capital U ultimate, and that's God. And so we're going through Scott Christensen's book here where we're talking about what is actually evil, and we're kind of clarifying our terms more. So we've established that evil does exist, and even if you're on the secular side, you kind of have this idea, unless if you're part of the Nietzschean camp and believe that there are no moral values. And so we kind of have established our definition there. Now, there seems to have been an answer at some point in time that a lot of people liked and agreed upon, and even people in the logic problem of evil couldn't argue against. And that's man having this kind of libertarian free will, this free will that we don't have anything that makes us make decisions, and we have the ability to choose between alternate possibilities, and we're free from any constraints upon us.
Right. So for the free will defense, right, this particular position is the answer, right? Why? How does God allow for free will? Well, it's not God, it's us. He's given us free will, and therefore we choose to do evil. Thus, God is off the hook, and evil can still exist because it's what we're doing, right? So this is seems to be a win-win, right? But Christensen doesn't think so, right?
Yes, and that's what this whole chapter is about. That's why we're on our third chapter 5 here, guarding the sacred treasure of free will. And we did also couple it, most people couple it with the natural law defense as well. So,
and we'll see that at the end.
You have the moral aspect of it, and then you have what about the tsunamis and the tornadoes? And so those two seem to work hand in hand with each other. And we've talked about kind of 9 different issues that Christensen has with this idea of libertarian free will. We've covered those in the past 2 episodes. And we're finishing up looking at kind of different strains of kind of who believes in libertarian free will. What are some of the rescuing devices to be brought into the conversation to kind of explain different aspects of God's nature that he allows this, but and we won't summarize the 9 here. You can go back to the last 2.
Actually, I think we're on 8 right now.
Okay, all right. So we still have a few more to go.
So
and so we'll kind of be covering a little bit more on the philosophical terms. And again, this isn't a full on. We can say everything about it. This is one chapter devoted here. Christensen has written a book, What About Free Will, where he's covered it kind of in more extensive detail. And there are a good number of YouTube podcasts out there, Free Thinker podcast, revealed Apologetics that you can go through that are presuppositional based and kind of break down a little bit more of what's the Reformed position, what's the response to the libertarian free will. And so I'll include links in the description below for those really good podcasts that's really been helpful. And I've learned a lot from them as well. And so we're right in the crux of our last 9 here, and we're starting out with libertarian free will seems to have a trouble with divine foreknowledge. So God exhaustively and infallibly knows all past, present, and future events that transpire in his creation. Pretty standard idea of God. He kind of knows all things. He knows the future. He exists outside of time, and so he kind of is able to look down upon the timeline of creation in a way that we can't really fathom, but we can kind of get it in our heads that, okay, he doesn't learn things. He's kind of looking down, and he knows it in a special way that only God can kind of know. This is known as the doctrine of foreknowledge. So something that's built up that is almost a characteristic of God here. But according to libertarianism, unfortunately, our free will is indeterministic, and one could have always chosen differently than he did. So how then does God know what his creatures will choose? If we come to the fork in the road, we have the right and the left. Let's assume that those are our only two choices. If nothing is constraining us or is factoring in how we choose which way to go, how does God know?
Then we could choose either direction, right?
That we will choose a way where he knows the future that it doesn't upset his will, his plans. Revelation is written. If whatever you think of Revelation, all believers or all Orthodox Christian believers believe that Jesus is coming back at some point in time for a certain purpose. How are we to know the end of the joke of I know we win in the end because I've read the end of the book. How does God have the ability to tell us these things? And then within the confines of Scripture, how is God able to say Jesus will be born? Bethlehem is going to be his birthplace. Mary's going to say yes to being the mother of Christ. That Joseph isn't going to run away. That the Magi is not going to go back to Herod. All these things. So how is it if we can choose alternate possibilities? Are we able to? How is God able to have a knowledge of what's going to take place in order to say, "Thus saith the Lord, this is what will happen"?
Yeah. So that seems to be a really serious problem, right? I mean, here we say that God knows all, and so he has foreknowledge of what's going to happen. But what Christensen, I think, is pointing out here is that's inconsistent with the idea that at any point we could make any decision, right? So if that's the case, then if we could make any decision at any point, then whatever God thought he knew, we might say, we might change that because we made a different decision, right? So it gets, so the problem is the future cannot change the fixity of God's past knowledge, right? He knows it. That's what foreknowledge is all about. Therefore, the future itself is fixed, not merely because God foreknows it, though, and here's the issue. It's fixed because he has foreordained it. Right. That's the solution to this. And what God foreordained, that's how he knows it, right? He foreknew. So the libertarian makes the creator kind of dependent on the creation. God has to kind of look forward to see what we're going to do, and then he has to kind of respond to that, I guess.
I think that's a big point. There's the aseity of God. He exists independent from his creation. He didn't have to create. But here, there seems to be a knowledge type where he has to let creatures do kind of what they will, and he kind of maybe bats them back in, like you put the bumpers up when your kids are just learning to bowl.
Well, he can't do it too much if they have libertarian free will, right? Because now he violates their free will
at some point in time. So it seems to be a sticky wicket.
Right. And so and of course the libertarians understand this, and they respond to this divine foreknowledge in different ways depending on their theological commitments, right? And so what he's going to do next now is kind of look at some responses to this particular problem that libertarian free will has. Right.
Well, the first is called simple foreknowledge, and so Christensen's Reform, so Calvinistic is kind of his brand, and within the Reform camp there are different responses to this as well. It's not just a single tent pole that we all run around. But here, Arminianism is the camp that would go towards this simple foreknowledge. So most free will theists of classical Arminian variety hold to the simple foreknowledge position. And this view says that after God chooses to create a particular kind of world, one where creatures contain this libertarian free will, because that's the thing that we have to have. We can't change that because we really want that to be the case so that we can explain free will and love and all these things
and evil and the existence of evil and with God's existence. Right.
And still, be free to choose and all this stuff. So that's kind of the thing that we're trying to save here. Then the knowledge God gains from what will happen in the world affords him a provision of choice that people will definitely make in the world, an exhaustive trailer of coming attractions kind of deal.
So God looks forward, says,
looks down the corridors of time.
I'm going to choose a particular free world because I know these are the various choices that people are going to make.
Yeah. So what is that? I mean, I don't know if we're supposed to respond yet, but what is that? So, okay, he looks down the corridor of time, and then he says, I've checked the back of the book for the answers. I'm going to write down 30, and that's the answer. I don't know how I'm going to get there yet, but it will be 30 because I've looked down the corridors of time. But that seems very independent of God. It seems. I mean, what is he looking down? Why? What's there to have history play out? If not him, then what's happening there? What is he looking down the corridors of? It's kind of I don't want to shoot my sci-fi reference, but this is the kind of quantum leap. Is okay. Scott Bakula's character Sam. He knows kind of what happens, what needs to change, and he needs to make that change, but he doesn't quite know how to get there. He just has to live in this person's body for however long in order to make that change. And lo and behold, every time he does, and thank goodness for it, because it's a great show. Should never be rebooted unless if they're going to redo the last episode, which was terrible.
So this view says then, as we have seen, right, that our independent power of choosing determines what God can and can't know about our future. Our independent power of choosing determines what God can and can't know about the future. We affect
God's choice in some manner.
Right. And of course, this is absurd, right?
I mean, it seems...
because the future is indeterministic in a world with libertarian freedom. By its nature, the future course of that world would be uncertain. Right. So, this means that God simply cannot know what his creatures will choose in such a world. And of course, this is why many Arminians acknowledge that how God can know the indeterminate choices of free creatures is somehow a mystery. Right. That's the position that many have to land in. Right.
Yeah. And again, I'm not sure. It's been a week and a half since I read this, but so God is looking down the corridors of time, and this is what happens. So then, do libertarian free creatures have the ability to choose opposite of what God looked at when he looked through the corridors of time? Because we're free, right? We're free to make that choice, and there's nothing that constrains us. So could we ever make a choice that does that previous vision opposite? So that seems like that's a weird thing, unless you're going to be kind of this hard determinist almost in this sense. Maybe it's not God forwarding it. Maybe it's the card dealer that lets them see down this corridor, or what's he decreeing? Is it just to say like, yep, I've seen the end, and let me tell you, it's a good one. So let's continue on this. So what is it that's here?
And that's exactly the problem that you're going to give to us here, right?
So also the simple foreknowledge position makes mockery of God's decree, since it wholly depends on his foreknowledge. God would not be able to decree any plan in this case.
Right.
What's he doing? He's just saying, I remember this
is
movie.
What I see, therefore that's what I'm going to decree.
Yeah.
I mean, really?
What's a decree then? It's the king decrees that on next Saturday a gladiatorial games will be held in good sport. Well, okay, that seems to be him kicking it off and saying all the things that must happen. The pies need to be ordered, the lances need to be sharpened, the horses need to be fed and watered. All these things have to come about, and he's got his people to do this. It's not, I heard some people talking on the road here, and they want to do a tournament, and I know that they're planning it already. So I've decreed that this will take place.
So the problem is what's happened here is you've gotten the effect before the cause. Right? That's the problem, right? God is supposed to be the ultimate cause of all things, and then if effects happen. But this seems to put the effect before the cause.
And this cause seems to be outside of God, which seems like it's a big problem here.
Yeah.
So furthermore, since the knowledge of the future would include his own actions, he couldn't change them without changing the responses of his creatures. His own actions would be what they would be. Any freedom he would have would be hamstrung by his foreknowledge. So
God can't change either, right? Once he's made this choice, now he's stuck.
Right. But people can still change.
Right.
So God's the one that is really limiting himself here in order for us to have libertarian free will, the ability to make alternate choices and all this. This is, again, Scott Christensen says, absurd. God's knowledge of the future must be predicated on what he has already freely ordained, not the other way around.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so, that's, so that's the first problem with this simple foreknowledge, what he calls the Arminian position with regard to foreknowledge. The next position with regard to foreknowledge that he finds problematic is open theism, right? So he says the second way to handle the foreknowledge problem is found in the open theism position. Open theism may be the most, he says, consistent position holding to the libertarian freedom, but that's
not saying much.
That's right. No consolation to the Orthodox Christian wishing to preserve, the fullness of God's attributes. Open theism solves the problem, notice he says, by denying that God has exhaustive, infallible foreknowledge of the future, right? So God doesn't know exhaustively, infallibly what's going to happen, right? It's open.
So this is kind of like how we talk about, like, Jesus, by taking on a form of the man, he restrains himself in certain capacities from accessing or fully realizing his full deity, all the knowledge and powers allotted to him, so he can be, both fully God and fully man. And this kind of does that to God, the Trinitarian being in God the Father as well, and the Holy Spirit.
The whole Godhead has to do that.
It seems to be really restrained on powers, characteristics, attributes that are kind of synonymous with just who God is at a basic level. So William Hasker here clarifies with this quote: "Much, not all, of the future is known by God as what might happen and as what will probably happen, but not what will definitely take place."
Oh, wow. So that's the kind of God we... God knows what might happen or probably happen, but he has no idea what will definitely happen.
This is, back in the day when arcades were a thing and you were going into the mall and you were looking at it and you go, "Mom, Dad, can we go to the arcade?" Well, we might be able to go if we have time. If you're good. So the future is dependent on you, children, in order to be good, and then we might be able to do that. And you go, might, maybe means no. And that's how you guilt parents into it, by removing that. And so this, guilts God into, you can't have a definite because we need within ourselves free decisions that you can't have, God, but it's very important to us.
Right.
Minus all the other things that we looked at before, like God doesn't have it, devil doesn't have it, heaven doesn't have it. So, okay, what does that mean? The Trinity doesn't have it. So aside from denying the obvious orthodox testimony of Scripture regarding God's omniscience, open theism also becomes a high-stakes gamble for God.
Yeah. God
has no idea whether more evil might occur than good, and that evil could be so horrendous as to shock God himself.
Right.
There could be these okay, well, I've got all the evil that took place in the killing of the perfect being of the man God Jesus. I've got all those constrained to all good. So I've sewn those all together. So there's no gratuitous evil. But people did some things out there that I didn't really expect them to do, or there was just too much to watch, and so there's this gratuitous evil out in the world. I haven't tied them back into good in some capacity here, and I'm kind of within time in my capacity here as God, and they've just gotten away from me. So there's gratuitous evil in the world. That's the possibility. Why isn't that the case? Mm-hmm. The God of open theism does not resemble the almighty, all-wise, loving God of Scripture at all.
Right. So they've created a different God, basically, right?
In order to save a philosophical idea and a kind of a desire. And we talked about, so this was what Tim Keller was saying kind of at the beginning of the chapter, was that, we kind of have this Western idea of freedom that we really like, that we really hold on to. And so this seems to be the most consistent way to have that.
Yeah. So that is open theism. Another way he suggests, right, is what he calls Molinism. So this is the third way of handling the foreknowledge problem. Molinism position derived from the 16th century Jesuit priest Louis de Molina, and he says that it divides divine knowledge into three categories, right? First, natural knowledge refers to all necessary factual truths and possibilities known to God immediately and intuitively, right? Now, these we might call tautologies. We might call, these truths that are, once you know the definition, then it has to be true, right? 2 plus 2 is 4. Bachelors are unmarried men, that kind of stuff, right? So they call that natural knowledge, and this is all necessary factual truths that are just have to be the case. He says that this knowledge of all that is or could be, that's the idea here. It is pre-volitional, right? Before anybody chooses, right? 2 plus 2 is 4 regardless of what I choose, right? So in the sense that it is independent then of or logically prior to what God decrees to happen, right? 2 plus 2 is 4 prior to God's decrees, right? Bachelors are unmarried men prior to God's decrees, right? It's true by definition.
Men have to take place.
That's right.
Yeah. So this is God knows anything that could happen.
Right.
All right, and so the first one was natural knowledge. The second one is free knowledge. Free knowledge refers to God's knowledge of all things that will certainly be. So this is God knows what will happen. Such knowledge is based on God's decree, his sovereign will, whereby he freely, unchangeably decrees, he wills all events in history that come to pass. So I'm God, and before the foundations of the world, I have decreed that my will to be carried out is that Jesus Christ will die on the cross at Calvary in 33 AD. That will happen. I'm going to will it. That's the pinnacle of history that I'm going to point everyone to. And then everything else that happens. Okay. Because it is dependent on his decree, free knowledge is post-volitional and thus contingent. All Orthodox Christians hold to natural knowledge, and Calvinism and Molinism hold to free knowledge. Okay, so we have the natural knowledge, God knows anything that could happen, and free knowledge is God knows what will happen because he's decreed it. Because he's decreed it,
right. And then thirdly, then, is unique to Molinism.
Yeah.
It's the belief in middle knowledge, right? So, which is claimed to lie somewhere, right, in a logical progression between natural and free in the middle.
Yeah,
right?
Makes sense in the middle. Okay, I got you there.
Middle knowledge means that God knows counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, he tells us, right? In other words, what people would freely choose in a libertarian sense under any possible scenario in any possible world, that is, any state of affairs that might exist. So God knows what people would freely choose, right? So this is the middle knowledge, right?
So they don't have the ability to fly, but here's everything that would happen if they come to the fork in the road. Here's the 1,000 permutations that could happen to this person. And then do that for every single event, for every single person, of every single thing in creation from the time of decree, of divine decree onward.
Right. Good. So now this middle knowledge then is like free knowledge in that it's contingent because it's dependent on what other people would freely choose.
The creation.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like natural knowledge in that it is pre-volitional, right? Pre-choice, right? Because it's independent of or logically prior to God's eternal decrees, right? So it's kind of like both of them, right?
Kind of before he creates the world and sends it into motion,
that
type of thing. So thus, God doesn't determine the range of possibilities. They arise strictly from what free creatures would do in each situation. So God has...
this is the key to it, right?
So this is the, it's kind of assumed that there are libertarian free creatures, and this is by creating this type of world creation people, this is what God kind of has to choose from and has the ability to know these are the things that will come about, and we're unrestrained from it.
So our particular choices gives God kind of what you said, what to choose from, right? He knows what we would do in every situation. Now he can choose based on what we would do in any situation in order to carry out what he wants to occur, right?
And it wouldn't involve everything, because then we're the walking robots in that scenario, right? And so there's got to be some constraints happening, and so you kind of have a bouncy ball effect of like, okay, you can go on the cement, but not over in the grass, or whatever it might be. So that seems to be the case here. So after a panoply of possible worlds are set before God, along with the total matrix of what each person would freely choose in those worlds. Again, this is everybody for every choice in every situation, and the rocks, the birds, the
every
meteorites.
Event, yeah.
I mean, this and that's just one person. Then get two people together, and how do you restrain two people together? Now get whole nations together. Now get whole battles and whole worlds together to figure out what that is, and then try to maintain this free will without overdoing it, whatever that might be. Seems to be a weighty thing here. So we've got this matrix involved, and God knows all these permutations. He then sovereignly selects, or he decrees, one particular feasible world that best serves his purposes.
Right.
So this gives him genuine foreknowledge of all that will certainly occur in that world, and he then providentially ensures that all its detail takes place in real time in history.
So we got him out of the conundrum, it seems, right?
I mean,
and we still have free will, right? Because he knows everything that we would do, and so he chooses the world where we would do the things that he wants us to do. And that's the world that he decrees, right? So it's almost a step backwards from directly intervening, right? Because it's kind of indirect, because he's choosing a particular world, right?
He's playing Plinko, and he knows how the Plinko chip will bounce off the pegs, and so he knows exactly how to get the $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever the price is these days.
and Christian tells us, it's not clear, however, how Molinism escapes the same problem of the simple foreknowledge view by introducing middle knowledge, right? No matter what the circumstances are, is it possible for God to infallibly know the indeterminate counterfactual choices of his creatures without violating their freedom? Right? That's the problem. So he quotes Hasker here, right, who says, with regard to a possible free choice that is never actually made, there are truths about what the creature might possibly do in that situation, and perhaps truths about what the creature would probably do, but there is no truth stating what one would definitely do. Right. So we're kind of up in the air, as it were, right?
We can always, can we choose something that would invalidate God's knowledge? It seems like if we're libertarian free will advocates, we have to say yes. We have the ability to trick God. He might know us really, really well, but if we can have the possibility to do the opposite, can we invalidate God's foreknowledge in whatever capacity there? Seems like that might be the case. So furthermore, since the counterfactuals of creaturely freedom are relevant only prior to God's decreeing the world, so boom, starting off, that he chooses to actualize or create. Once that world was decreed, nothing could prevent, and so he gives, for instance, nothing could prevent the 9/11 terrorist attacks from using libertarian freedom in the actual here and now to renege on the whole plan and plunge their planes into the upper bay near the Statue of Liberty at the last moment. So it seems to remove that.
I mean, if they have libertarian free will, is what the point he's trying to make is, if they have libertarian free will, even the world that God chooses where they would do these various things, they could still do other things if they have libertarian free will. That's the point he's trying to make. Right.
So it seems that their libertarian freedom in the actual world is an illusion. The only freedom that people appear to have is confined to the mind of God, this middle knowledge, before the world is actualized. And again, actualized by who or by what? Because there seems to be, before God creates, how is there something to look at? without actualizing it.
Yeah. Well, it's all in the mind of God. And so, so the point here is, if they really have free will, then there's nothing that God can do to change it. If he chooses to decree a world where he knows what they're gonna do, then do they really have free will?
Yeah, right. So we're confined to the mind of God prior to his decreeing the world that to make. They have no freedom to change what he has already decreed, rendering libertarian free will kind of a moot point. Like, yeah, okay, we kind of think we have free will, but we really don't, according to this idea. Thus, it's hard to see how there can be real knowledge of counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, because it happens prior to decree. God set it in motion. This is what will happen. I've looked down the corridors of time. This person will choose it. I've decreed it. And there, like, you think you have the ability to eat vanilla ice cream, but unfortunately, by you eating chocolate, you realize you have a tooth decay, and then you go to the dentist, which lets you meet your wife, and you fall in love and have 3 children, and one of those children is baby Hitler. Oh, man, if only chocolate ice cream. But guess what? You didn't choose the vanilla, so fortunately, you caused baby Hitler. That's Congratulations. Right. but you really didn't, because you just think you had the ability to choose. Right. This is removed.
So he gives us a different example. His example, God's so-called middle knowledge of counterfactuals of freedom would include this particular example. If Adam were placed in the Garden of Eden and tempted by Satan, he would sin. Right? That's his knowledge of counterfactual freedom of the world, right? This is what will happen if Adam is placed. So according to Molinism, this truth must be contingent. That is dependent on what the person Adam would do. So it must be known beforehand and thus independent of, that is logically prior to God's decree to create the world that this is happening in. But notice, how can God know that this statement is true? On what factual basis, and this is kind of the issue that you raised a minute ago, on what factual basis can he know it to be a legitimate truth claim? It can't be grounded, and here's the issue, grounding, right? It can't be grounded in God's nature, right, his natural knowledge, because God's nature is necessarily what is. So this isn't what is, it's contingent. Mm-hmm. And so it cannot be grounded in contingent truths, which depend on the future acts of free agents. Otherwise, that makes God dependent on his creatures. And it can't be grounded in God's decree, his free knowledge, because that would imply that Adam's choice was determined by God. And of course, Molinism denies that free choices are determined by God. So there's a conundrum here that this position finds itself in, right? There's no ground for the position, is what he's trying to say, right?
So you kind of remove the grounding in order to continue to have this idea that, I mean, it seems attractive kind of deal, but once we kind of think about it a little bit more, we see that we run into issues. And, for Molina to come about, I mean, he was this counter-Reformation person, so he's looking for explanations to kind of deny this movement coming up within what he's trying to respond to. And so middle knowledge is coming out as a counter-Reformation idea. Not saying that he didn't, believe it, but it seems to be done for a purpose, at least. So that should at least be known on the table. Mm-hmm. So furthermore, it cannot be grounded in Adam's nature or any such creature either. Satan or the angels or Uncle Bob or whoever it might be, since the essence of this statement must be true prior to God's decree to create such creatures.
Right. So notice it can't be grounded in Adam's nature because Adam doesn't even exist.
Right, yeah, right.
So it can't be grounded in his nature. Right?
Why didn't God change his nature? Yeah, something like that. Therefore, middle knowledge lacks any grounds whatsoever, and this is absurd, since we ordinarily assume that contingent truths about creatures have grounds. So something is dependent on something. There's a grounding for that. There's the choice. There's the reason for it, unless we are given a very good reason to think otherwise.
Right.
So the robbing the bank example. The person goes in and they don't have a choice because the bomb is strapped to them. Okay, well, they don't really have something to to choose otherwise because it's kind of being made for them there. So middle knowledge appears to be a kind of knowledge that exists independently of creation. Okay, so that's what we're trying to kind of get to almost. And it's also independently of God himself. So where does this give us? So who must be the source of all knowledge? Yeah. If not God, then who?
Right. Where did all this come from?
If God is kind of, so he's restrained himself and he's looking down the course of time, it's independent of God, it's independent of creation. So it seems to be like God's using the cards he's dealt. But who's the dealer? Who's handing out these cards to him that God goes, yes, I've got my jack and my ace. I'm in good standing here. I think I'll go ahead with this world right here. Thank you, dealer.
Yeah. Right. So Molinism obviously has other problems, he says. But even if it offered a coherent account of human freedom, divine foreknowledge, and providence, it would not escape the problem of divine culpability, right? In other words, blaming God for Adam's sin and the whole introduction of evil into the world. Molinists must say that God considered all feasible worlds among the possible worlds, right? What people would do and that sort of thing, including in the world that Adam would choose sin, and that he then decreed that world anyway, knowing, right, that Adam would do this, right? And since God acted in a way that would ensure Adam's sin, Molinism has the same trouble that Calvinism does in escaping the charge that God caused him to do it, right? Yeah. Because that's the world he created.
Yeah.
Right?
And so even if you kind of step back and say, okay, well, the Calvinist position is that, God uses the ends and the means in order to carry out his will. You just have the opposite in the Arminian worldview, the Molinism worldview too, because by God not taking action, doesn't he also have some sort of culpability? He could change it if he wanted to, but he chooses not to for whatever reason.
Yeah, or he could have chosen a different world where Adam didn't sin. Right. The fact that he chose the world where Adam sinned, this point he's trying to make is that God then becomes the cause of the sin, and God is culpable, that is blamable for the sin, right? That's the problem. So they haven't escaped the, God is causing sin problem of the problem of evil, right? They've kind of come at it from a different angle.
Right. And there are responses that Reformed people have to these charges as well, and we're just covering the slice of life here. And again, What About Free Will is the other book, and again,
and he's going to deal with these in his particular position.
I mean, he has to, right? Because he's kind of chopping down the redwood, and he's wanting to plant the tree differently here.
So should we save the rest of this for next time?
Oh, man, I mean, we have to. I thought we were going to do it in 3, but there's just so much to say here. And again, if our kind of job here is to go through the book and try and break it down to you. And so we're coming up with these terms that we're trying to utilize, and we're trying to present what the author is presenting to you as well. And so, these concepts might be a struggle. They might be difficult because you're thinking, middle knowledge, like that's not something that I kind of know. So again, we break these whole episodes up into clips, and so throughout the week we release them, and so you can kind of pick where there might be an issue, and you can kind of point out on the key terms that again he includes in the study questions, the further reading. Our good friend James Anderson is notated here into
cool.
How biblical is Molinism. Guillaume Bion, which I'm sure I'm doing a terrible job of my French. I took Spanish, so all my French words have ennies in them. And this is a really good book, Excusing Sinners and Blaming God. I've heard him on Revealed Apologetics with Eli Allah, and he's just fascinating to listen to. And of course, he's got the French accent, so that helps too. So, so again, there are resources here. There are resources elsewhere to get in that. So if you're just kind of looking for a little bit more expanse on that, gotquestions.org is a good place too. That kind of has I looked at middle knowledge to see what they said, and it's very balanced there as they usually are. So there are many different resources to check out if you kind of get stuck on some of these like actualized worlds and stuff like that. So again, these are bigger concepts that we're trying to break down for you and trying to present as honestly as we can without, creating straw men. And so if you might get hung up on something, there are resources available. So alleviate yourself to them so you can know, and we can continue on our book with what is evil, so we can figure that out.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.